So today we'll be talking about the Isaurian Dynasty. Now, I think many would agree with me if I was to put him in the good pile.
Oh, I do disagree, but I'll get on to why I do.
Okay, so there are three or four main reasons why I think he's a good emperor. The first is his defense of Constantinople. Not only is he able to trick the Arab commander Marsalama into thinking that he was going to give up the city for quite a few months, and also had, just before his reign, managed to dupe him out of capturing Amorian, but which bought him valuable time to get the city prepared for Constantinople, to get the Bulgars to come down and eventually destroy the Arab attack. Throughout that year-long siege, Leo III was able to defeat the Arabs, outlast them, and then when they retreated, completely destroy their initiative. He was able to mitigate their relief forces. He was able to crush rebellion in Sicily, and as a result of that, he was able to save the empire because of his of this victory. And I would definitely attribute some of that victory to his leadership as an emperor. There are other factors for why they won, but I think that's definitely a factor to be considered. The second reason why I think he is a good emperor would be the Eklege, the law book he created right at the end of his reign in 741, a Greek version of the book of the Justinian Code for everyday use, so to try and reintroduce law and order into the countryside, which had kind of fallen apart a little bit during the 20 years of anarchy. Nicephorus the Patriarch, who talks about how right at the turn of the 8th century, there is a kind of decline of education during this period, and very few people are actually literate, if not educated. And it's this kind of a process of revitalizing the empire after it's gotten to its lowest ebb since ever, basically, and up to that point. The third reason is that he has a number of rebellions during his reign, and he's able to overcome all of them. Although he is less successful in the East, this is mostly because for most of his reign, he's not very active in warfare against other powers. This is partially because we don't know all that much about kind of the ins and out of his reign, because a lot of the sources for him are very hostile, for a subject we'll come on to later. But he does manage to rein in the Pope. He manages to start instituting reforms. So one of the things he does is he develops the system of warehouses and their offices that Constans II had introduced. He develops that into a bit more into the strategia commands all around the empire. He disbands the Carabisianoi and reforms it into the Kiberaeot strategis. So it's a bit more organized. The fourth reason why I think he is a good emperor is because he sorts out the succession, and his descendants stabilize the empire after the 20 years of anarchy for the next until the turn of the century. So the 8th century is very much the Isaurian century in that regard. But I understand you disagree, so I'd like to hear your thoughts, Mark.
Oh, yes. You see, I've actually done a huge 180 in my previous views of him. I'm actually of the view that he's a great emperor. And I think that's unexpected even to you.
Oh, really?
I
Before you were
think.
saying you disagreed with me, but go on.
Well, you said most people would put him in would agree with you in putting him into good, and I'd say you're being. Yeah, I would say that he is worthier of being a great emperor. There's a number of reasons for this. First and foremost, he saved the empire. You can't underestimate his saving of the empire. The law code, as you already mentioned, and his remarkable resilience in the face of rebellions. And I think that there is no real blot against him as an emperor. There is nothing really you can level against him. The only thing you can level against him is his role in the introduction, so to speak, of iconoclasm.
Yes.
I know that some modern scholarship tries to put the emphasis more on Constantine V.
Yes.
Than Leo.
As more as a doctrinal thing rather than just kind of personal feelings. Because I know in Leo's reign, there's no actual church synod or anything against iconoclasm. There is a meeting in the government where he just says, like, these icon things, I don't like them, so I don't want to see them, kind of thing.
Well, I
mean, not quite like that, but
yes,
in that spirit.
I mean, the reason why I would say is because you can see the legacy of his rule, not just in the theme organisations. His conflict with the Pope in Italy, his transferring of southern Italy to the Diocese of Constantinople, I believe,
and Illyricum, which would include places like Greece and
particularly with Italy. Yeah. I mean, you see the legacy of that in that there was a Byzantine presence in southern Italy.
1071.
The only real criticism one ever sees against him is his role in iconoclasm. I don't quite think that be used against him in too great a manner. And for that reason, I would say he is undoubtedly a great emperor.
So, unfortunately, his succession was not the smoothest of things, because although Constantine V succeeded to the throne with some security, Artabasdos, who was the son-in-law of Leo III, he also thought he should be emperor. And they fought a civil war. Quite a long time for a civil war, 3 years. And Constantine V eventually won. But Artabasdos, almost uniquely amongst usurpers, he manages to get crowned in Constantinople and is recognized as a legitimate emperor until he's deposed, of course. And which is why he's on this list. And I don't know how to... I mean, it is kind of a win for him in that he's able to achieve so much so quickly, and that he's able to defeat Constantine. He is able to seize Constantinople and then gets fairly wide recognition of his power. And then from there it crumbles into nothing. He just has defeat after defeat. His support evaporates, and by the end of it he's caught and blinded, and then we don't see him again.
Yeah, he is a hard
mediocre.
As an emperor, the main thing which characterizes his reign is to fight his civil war.
Yeah.
Which one could say, was that really good for the empire? It's his reign of I believe it's a couple of years or so. He actually mentions
741 to 43.
There's no real disaster occurs. I'm inclined to put him either mediocre or incompetent. It probably depends how generous I'm feeling. I'll probably put him in mediocre. Mainly because I think getting the throne is not an act, perhaps, of incompetency.
I think there is also the element of Constantine was also a better commander. He was able to come back and win out over Artabasdos. So yeah, I think the most generous is mediocre for Artabasdos. It is an achievement in itself that he managed to accomplish as much as he did from a usurper's point of view.
And if you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe for more content about the late Roman and Byzantine Empire. Stay notified using the bell, and now let us continue.
So now Constantine V.
Oh.
So he was responsible for the creation of the Tagma. He campaigned quite a lot against both the Arabs and the Bulgars. So he's the first emperor to really not only have success against fighting the Bulgars, but really hammer against them, kind of push them back out of Thrace. In fact, the Thracian inland, so the Byzantines had managed to cling on to the coastline of Thrace and Constantinople, but pretty much the whole of the Thracian peninsula had fallen out of their control, and it's because of Constantine V that they managed to retake the inland part of Thrace. There's an element of recovery during his reign. There's a reinvigoration of scientific learning. So he appoints a court astrologer during his reign, which kind of doubles as astronomy and so on. He rebuilds the aqueduct of Valens, which is good because not only does it bring water to Constantinople, but it shows us that the population in Constantinople has caught up, has enlarged itself enough to warrant having more water supply to it. Lots of Slavs and are resettled in the empire. There is a major focus in the core provinces of the empire, in Anatolia, and also starting to push out into Thrace. On the alternative side to that, Ravenna is lost, so the northern part of Italy, which, although at that point was not really much of basically ceased to be a core territory by that point, was conquered by the Lombards. Building on the iconoclast thing, he turns it into a doctrinal issue and has the first council about it and so on, and begins persecution of the iconic files. On the whole, he is a very successful emperor. He sorts out the succession. The succession of Leo IV is the first smooth one in a decade, so he's a very impressive emperor. I think it's almost telling that future emperors in the 9th century, and also Constantine VI, all want to emulate Constantine V. He kind of stands out during the 8th century as the best Isaurian emperor. What do you think of Constantine V, Mark?
I think he is a great emperor. He is militarily extremely successful. I think if it were not for the recurrence of the plague at Constantinople, he might have been able to have made some proper headway in the east. The loss of Ravenna is obviously problematic for him, but
symbolically important, if not territorially that important, because northern Italy by that point had basically ceased to be a important region for the Byzantines.
His organisation of the Tagmata, which become sort of the professional core of the army for years to come. So yes, I think that he is a great emperor.
He certainly has a legacy as well. So I think I agree with you, Mark. I think he is a great emperor. He's definitely the best of the Isaurian emperors. I think maybe if he was to be compared to other great emperors like Anastasius, then maybe he would lose out. But he's kind of more on par with like Valentinian, or maybe even better than Valentinian in that regard. So, shall we talk about his son, Leo the Khazar?
Yes.
So, I think the tragic thing about Leo the Khazar is that he only reigned for 5 years, whereas his father and grandfather managed to reign for, I think, 30 years each, roughly. So it kind of never really got to see him, the kind of long-term effects of his reign. But from what we do know about Leo IV, I think you see he is a iconoclast, but he tries a more tolerant stance towards it. So the persecutions end. He is willing to have iconophiles around, so long as they're not, so long as they keep it private, so to speak. He is very much more. He has a successful campaign in the East. He, in fact, one of the major figures of this period, Michael Lecanodrakon, scores a significant victory against the Arabs in the East. He also sets up the succession and manages to secure it from his half-brothers, Nikephoros and all of them, because Constantine V had quite a lot of children. Yeah, his reign is not that long, but it is successful. So I think I would put him as a decent emperor. I don't think I could put him higher because he didn't live long enough to really get going.
I'm perhaps once again being generous with him. I'm putting him in good.
Okay.
The only thing I would say which stopped him from becoming like his father and grandfather, a great emperor, is his unfortunate death in 780. But you can see he was clearly militarily competent.
I think also very politically savvy.
Yeah, the Byzantine Empire was robbed of him too soon. I think he was a good emperor for many of the reasons you've noted.
He doesn't manage to put a step wrong. If you try and look into the end of his reign with the dispute with his wife Irene over icons, I think one of the troubles with that is that not only are we dealing with sources that were written after the fact, so there's no contemporary source that says this happened. The sources are very partisan in this period as well. So all the iconophile sources, like Theophanes, hate the iconoclasts with a vengeance and kind of buy into the propaganda afterwards. And also Irene would have needed to propagandize Leo IV a bit because she was also an iconophile emperor and also a woman and had to kind of fit into the job of regent for such a long time and emperor, maybe, and try and sort of legitimize her own position a bit by kind of rubbishing Leo IV. But I mean, up until that point in 780, they seem to have got on fine. So I think it's one of those. We have the story, but perhaps the truth has been lost to time.
Yes, perhaps I should explain a bit more. In the name of my own sort of consistency on my list, I'm trying not to use schisms or the formulation of religious schisms as necessarily too big a hammer blow against an emperor. So you can see it just consistency's sake, for my own consistency's sake. Heraclius, I haven't gone and shoved down the list, and I did not intend to do the same thing with the iconoclast emperors either.
Yeah, or Justinian with his weird brand of Christianity right at the end of his reign, but he was a bit off his rocker by that point. We kind of have a weird situation here in that although the next emperor to become emperor is Constantine VI, the first 10 years of his reign, his mother, Irene, is in charge, and I almost kind of want to split Constantine VI into two, because before, from that 780 to 790 period, when Irene is in charge, she's actually very successful. She lays the foundation work for the reconquest of Greece, manages to pacify lots of Slavic tribes, which Greece by this point was basically 95% owned by the Slavs by this point, and all of the Roman possessions have been pushed into very small enclaves around city centres like Athens and Thessalonica, and it's in her reign that the foundations for the reconquest are put into effect. She certainly has in this period, she has some defeats, and she is less successful against the Arabs. But fortunately, except for having to pay money over to them, which by now the empire can actually afford to do thanks to the regenerative work of Leo Constantine and Leo, it's not too bad. And also her successes have results, and her failures don't have any long-term negative side effects. And she also manages to overturn iconoclasm in 787 and kind of put the issue to bed temporarily.
Constantine VI, once he reaches majority, is no longer under his mother's thumb, so to speak.
Yeah.
Is a pretty poor emperor.
My brother, I was telling him about Constantine and Irene, and he described Constantine VI as the archetypal mama's boy. He gets rid of her, and then has one campaign. It goes okay, and then the first thing he does when he gets back is bring her back. And then for the rest of his reign, from like 792 to 797, they actually rule as joint emperors. But she is part of the government. She's like a junior emperor almost.
Yeah.
Constantine VI, he tries to be Constantine V, and just kind of is a bit pathetic. He campaigns in the east. He has a small victory, but nothing really comes of it. It's not very successful. He campaigns in the west, and it's also just kind of a bit yes. Then he also tries to emulate his mother during her regency and has a grand tour of Thrace. And I should also mention, during her regency, Irene was able to consolidate what Constantine V had done and was actually extending Roman control over much more of Thrace. And he tries to do the same thing, but he has this catastrophic battle against the Bulgars, where his court and everyone there are caught out by the Bulgars and they're just slaughtered. The hero of his times, Michael Lacanodrakon, is killed, so that's a big loss there. He manages to produce his own religious controversy because of his affair with Theodote. And then there's this whole controversy with the Studion monks. By the end of his reign, he has basically lost support from most sectors of society that had supported him 7 years earlier when he deposed Irene. Irene then has to step in. So I'm inclined to think that I think Constantine is hovering between either incompetent or bad for me.
Yes, I've put him in bad.
I think I'll put him in bad too. It's just kind of he had minor successes, but his failures seem to outweigh all of them. And most of the successes of his reign before he was sole emperor were Irene. So yeah, I think Constantine VI was a pretty bad emperor. So what do you think of Irene, Mark?
She's a hard one.
Controversial, you might say.
But in her period of actual being empress in her own right, I know it's no fault of her own, but she undermined the legitimacy of the Byzantine Empire through her very act of taking the throne. And it led to Charlemagne being crowned with some legitimacy by Leo to be Emperor of the Romans. So that should count against her, I think, a lot in that such a gross undermining of the empire.
Okay.
Even though it's arguably no fault of her own, she can't help she's a woman, but nevertheless, what she did enabled the Holy Roman Empire to basically look upon itself, at least with some degree of legitimacy. But in spheres other than that, I believe she was able to crush a few rebellions, but I believe she did lose some of Italy also.
I think the Italy situation was that now Charlemagne had become Roman emperor. He had the idea of, now it's time to claiming his rights to the rest of it. But I think one thing that counts in Irene's favour in that matter is that she did manage to come to terms with Charlemagne, and perhaps the marriage proposal should be seen in that light, that you now have two Roman empires, so to speak, and there is an attempt to perhaps, if not unite them politically, then kind of unite them in a symbolic way.
Yes.
So
yes.
Charlemagne the emperor of the Romans marries the other emperor of the Romans, then you'll have a united Roman Empire, at least in theory.
I do doubt that it would have been.
In fact, these plans are largely scuppered by two things. One of her eunuchs tries to dissuade her and does the best he can to try and foil these marriage arrangements, but also her deposition by Nicephorus I is puts an end to the matter in itself. Where would you put her on your list, Mark?
Mediocre.
Mediocre.
You can see there is competency there, but equally, as I say, her reign was problematic for the empire in the long run, and so I can't think to put her higher than mediocre.
Okay.
Where do you think she should go?
I think I would be a little more generous to her and put her in decent. Now I do have so I will be a little different in my criteria to Mark. So I will judge her on her rule in general, to 802 period, and I do this because she is the main figure in the government from that period, except for the small intermission in 790 to 92. So that's a good 20 years where she is in or around the reins of power. And you see quite a lot happening because of her. You see further gains in Europe, consolidation of Thrace, and kind of the further developments in the strategia. By the end of the reign of her successor, Nicephorus I, you have the theme system fully established by 813. It's true that she doesn't have the greatest success in foreign affairs. A lot of the wars she fights, she ends up losing. But many of those wars don't have too many negative consequences for the empire. They don't lose any significant territories. I think the only significant places they lose are actually under Constantine VI rule, when he was in charge. So in her personal reign, she was in an incredibly difficult position in a way, in that she had to try and invent herself as a legitimate emperor, despite the fact that she was quite unique in a way, being a woman.
Yes.
But I do also agree that her rule was not particularly great, in that she started undermining the financial situation of the government by giving grants to the poor and the church and so on, which, although were rectified by Nicephorus I, while they were going on, did kind of hamstring the empire a bit. But I think credit where it's due. She was very popular. I mean, when she did take the throne from Constantine VI, it was less of a kind of plot behind scenes, kind of cloak and dagger stuff, and more like the strategia and kind of members of the government actually sailed out to grab Constantine VI and take him back to the capital. It's far more of a proper coup in a way.
Yeah.
And there's the blinding of Constantine VI is I think you do get an idea of, although she did blind him, she did regret it, because she spends a lot of her reign kind of being charitable and preparing for her death or impending demise. But by this point, she was in her 50s or so. So she was starting to get on in 8th century terms. And I think that does show. So she is a lot more active in the 780s and when she's much younger, in her kind of late 20s. And that's kind of where we see the main benefits of her reign. So I think she is a decent emperor.
Yeah, fair enough.
So there we have the Isaurian dynasty. The empire fighting for its life has definitely come to an end, and they're the dynasty that's responsible for bringing the empire back from the brink and putting it on the ascendant for the next few centuries.
They're very, very interesting emperors, and I thank you for having me on.
It's always a pleasure, Mark, and I hope everyone enjoyed listening to our chat. Please tell us if or not, or what would your list be? Thank you for listening, and this has been Eastern Roman History.